Okay, so the link between this topic and our previous topic of the business plan, if you consider one of the elements was about describing the research that we're going to do, and you can see that there's lots of different opportunities here, so it's likely that it'll be much more of a written question where you need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the type of market research, whether or not it's possible for a business to succeed without market research. So some of the key terms for your vocabulary book. So we've got to try and think, why on earth, if you were a new business or an existing business, why would you try and undertake market research? Because it could be quite costly. Even if it's free, it's going to be costly in terms of your time, when there could be an opportunity cost that you could be doing something else with your time. So let's look at some of the reasons. Well, there could be simply descriptive reasons. So it's for you to try and collect and analyse some data to identify important pieces of information. So we could try and look at that to look at whether or not we've achieved our objectives. So let's say, for instance, if you had, this is the amount of sales that we would like to make, and it's volume or value, you could try and find out whether or not you have done that, and you could try and look for identifying trends. So simple things like, if we look at our past data, we can try and see whether or not our sales are growing or if they're lowering. Is there any stability in the trend? If we were to put it on a graph, would we be able to see a pattern? And you could try and make some comparisons. So let's say, for instance, we would have our own internal information over time, and we could try and find that of a competitor to see whether or not we are relatively the same. So do we sell the same amount of products as our local competitors or a national competitor even? Do we spend as much on our advertising as our rivals? Are we operating in the same market segment, or are we completely in a different market segment? Now we could be carrying out market research to try and explain things. So really the question that we're trying to answer is, why do certain things occur? So you could do some more in-depth research on that. You could try and carry out market research for predictive reasons. So it's about trying to predict a trend or find a link to try and see what will happen in the future, so we could react positively to it and be successful still. Or it could be for exploratory reasons. So let's say, for instance, when a new product is introduced, well, there won't be any information in the past about it, so you would like to try and look at what you think consumer reaction is, and see whether or not it's successful. Now, I know on this slide in your book you'll have lots of information, so we're going to look at the primary market research. So we're going to look at experiments, observations, surveys, focus group and test market, and there's a few different ways. You can see surveys in the middle there. I apologise, I'm not quite sure why the words aren't there, but you'll be able to see them in your copy anyway. Okay, so let's do away with some of the myths to start with. So there's primary market research and there's secondary market research. Now, secondary market research is already in evidence. It was collected for a different purpose. Primary market research, then, we're collecting it for a specific purpose. We might not do it ourselves. We might invest some money and have somebody else do it. There's a specific purpose to it. It's first hand. Now, it's very expensive. So in reality, it's the secondary market research that comes first, and it's only if you can't find any other, you can't find the answers any other way, only then do you fill the gaps with primary market research. And so we're going to look at these primary market research options already. You've got to try and concentrate on what your organisation needs. That's got to be the primary reason for using this method. So we'll start with experimentation then. So experimentation is likely to occur on a small scale, maybe a local scale. So let's say, for instance, when we're quite used to Greggs and the Northeast, we all know what a stotty is. But if you go to other areas of the country, stotties might not be so prevalent in them because it's quite a regional, local taste. And so to experiment, now that Greggs has not just become a regional business, but there's national businesses and even some international businesses, they decided that they would experiment with their product range in their store, and they actually found out that stotties weren't very successful in other areas of the country, and so it wasn't it's not sold apart from in the Northeast. So what are the benefits then of just placing a product in a small area to start with, to see how you get on? Well, it's relatively a cheap method. You look for how much stock you've got on the shelf at the end of the days. It's nice and easy for employees to ask customers what they think about it. You could do little taste tests to see if you can sell your product. And I think it's really good because we're not just imagining this, we're actually looking at what customers buy, and it's a proven fact because you've got sales records to back it up. Now, a drawback on that is, well, if we take Greggs for instance, how many different locations do they have to try it at? And just because it didn't work in, let's say, for instance, the borders of Scotland, doesn't necessarily mean to say that it wouldn't work in London. So it could actually, the area that you experiment in might not be what the whole country sees. The other thing is, it could delay the introduction of a successful strategy. So if Stotty Cakes are taken off and you placed it in one shop in 1 week and then you moved to a different shop the second week, that could take you 52 weeks of the year before you placed it in every other shop round that wasn't located in the northeast of England. And so you could actually be losing out on sales, and that would be a drawback to our business. Okay, so we could use observations. So we could just wander around shops and we can watch the customers. That's basically what we're doing. So we're trying to look at their reactions and whether or not, let's say, for instance, a display attracts people or people to it, and do they buy the product from the display, or things that are placed in certain locations of your outlet, are they more successful than others? So one of the benefits is we can modify displays if problems are revealed. So let's say, for instance, it could be at eye level, or it could be you've got to bend down to it. Have you got to stretch up tall? Any of those things, customers can react differently to them, and people can observe exactly what kind of reactions you're going to get. And depending on your target market, let's say, for instance, if your target market was elderly people, well, they're not going to be able to reach down, and elderly people get smaller. So are you going to put it on the top shelf? Would that be very successful? You can look at customer behaviour, and sometimes it kind of gives you an idea of what they're thinking. It would give you the opportunity perhaps to then think, do I need to ask some more of this customer to see what they're thinking when they're displaying these buying habits? It's relatively expensive, so the idea wouldn't be that it would just be a normal observer. So if you're going to have specialist, you've got to consider that cost, and remember that overall it's just looking at what consumers do when they're shopping, not what they're thinking about when they're shopping. So another method is to hold a focus group. So we get a range of people, it's usually a group. We try and discuss their feelings about a product or a particular market. Because it's interactive, we can gather much more detailed information. So it's not like I've asked a question and you think, oh, I wish I'd been able to ask another question. There's no limit to the discussion that can go on. And it's very nice that because you've got a range, particularly if you're thinking about one target market, or if you've got a range of the market, maybe you haven't got a particular age group, you'll be able to get lots of different ideas about how to market your product or service. What are some of the drawbacks? There might be bias, so one person in particular might have a thought and they might be quite strong in putting their ideas across, and other people in the focus group might feel a bit intimidated, and then they might not be quite as forceful in giving their opinion. And also, if it was a focus group for a particular product, would you not just say, oh yeah, I really like it? And in reality, I'm not actually sure you do really like it. But you usually get paid to operate one of these. It's very good. Lots of students get involved in these, and so there could be an expense involved in it. Even if you don't get paid, I'm pretty sure these people would probably still like some refreshments, and so you need to consider that. When we look at surveys then, there are lots of different kinds of surveys. So usually it might be completing a questionnaire. It can be face-to-face. There are lots of different ways. It's designed to collate characteristics, get views from a cross-section of consumers. So we could start with personal interviews then. They're likely to be face-to-face. The interviewers maybe got a clipboard with a questionnaire on it, and they fill it in from whatever you responded to verbally. So one of the benefits is a wide range of information can be collected. We could have some open questions. That's where you give your opinions, so you write more than just a ticky box. Or we could have a closed question. That's where you maybe have to choose one. So it could be male, female. Well, I can see that. I don't even need to ask it. And so you can see how you can actually build up a large range of information. You've got to consider the value of closed questions. Open questions are much better if you want to express opinions and things, but actually it's quite difficult to collate open question answers because there might be 50 people responding and there could be 50 completely different answers. So how do you draw any conclusions? And a really good thing is the person who's conducting the interview can explain anything that you're not quite sure of, so they can reword the question in a particular way if you don't get what it means the first time. It's very time consuming. You've got to wait for respondents to answer the questions. Then they've got to write it down, so it might be a wait, listen, write, wait, listen, write. You might get a lot of false answers. A lot of people don't want to give information like that to another person, or they might feel that they're going to be judged. Will there be an unbiased cross-section of the public? It could be the fact that loads of females are answering rather than a good selection. It's maybe older people, especially if you go down the town and it's a midweek. Will you get people who are full-time employees of a specific income range? I'm not sure. And also there could be some bias involved because the interviews explaining uncertainties, they might twist the questions so that you answer it one way rather than another. Okay, so alternatively, I'm not going face to face. I could have a postal survey, so I'm going to put the survey in the post, expect them to complete it at home and return it, or you could give them a prepaid envelope, or you can say that it'll be collected on a certain day and someone will be expected to go around all these houses and collect them. So it's fairly cheap. If you can get someone to deliver them by hand rather than having to post them, that would make it even cheaper. Geographical areas can be targeted in that way. It's really good for that, especially if it's a local information that you're really building upon. It can avoid bias because it's not you're not leading it as a question, as a person. It gives you longer to answer the questions, so you could sit down and answer it and you think about the benefits of doing it at home. What are some of the drawbacks? It's very, very poor. approximately about 2% of postal surveys are ever responded to, unless there's some kind of incentive. So, and that would incur additional costs to offer the incentives. Are you absolutely certain that the responses are representative? You could have very strong opinionated people that just don't care. The level of responses is not guaranteed. You could give gifts, competition entries, again, extra expenses. We've talked about that. Okay, so somewhere in the middle, you could conduct telephone interviews. They're likely to be a market researcher telephones a member of the public and addresses them, says who it is that they are. Would you have some time to answer some questions, at which point they might turn around and say no, and so you've lost them as a target market, potential person. So let's go with it. What are the benefits? Calls are cheaper to make. There's lots of deals. You can get a call centre to do it for you. You don't necessarily have to do it yourself. Customers can be targeted, so we could use lists. We could use the census, something that's already there that gives them a list. BT directory inquiries, if your number isn't, if it's on the list, you could be included. Often when you purchase things like refrigerators, washing machines, cars, anything like that, you've got to give personal details, and companies can use that in the future to telephone you. One of the difficulties is you've got to limit the number of questions and the kind of response that you expect people to make. Otherwise, you just get this, there's not any more. And so you might get really good answers to the first couple of questions, and then you might get poorer answers as time goes by, because obviously people could be time rich and have lots of time to answer, or they could be time poor, in which case they're rushing through the answers and not really thinking about them. And actually, there are a lot of people who look very negatively upon any sort of cold calling, because it links to unpopular telesales. So we don't want your opinion, we actually want to sell something. And so a lot of customers are very reluctant to engage in telephone questionnaires. Okay, so this is one of the newer methods. Let's have an internet survey. So quite often when you buy things now, they'll ask you for an email address, and then a week or a few days after you've bought your product and they think, oh yeah, I should be using it at home, you'll either be satisfied or not, they'll send you an internet survey. It's only addressed to you. You can take the time to answer it or not. So I think it's relatively inexpensive. It's not cost you anything really to collect people's email addresses, and it's a very popular method as technology is moving on. It's likely that the person that you've sent it to will be interested in giving feedback, because they've maybe used your website, they've maybe bought something. I would suspect you would get a much higher response rate than some of the other methods. It offers you the opportunity to update frequently, so you can use the same sort of survey over a long period of time, depending on what answers you get. Quite often says, there's a box at the end and it says, tick this, if you're happy to take part in a further survey, which might include a telephone call, please tick this box. Something along that idea. And because it's on the internet, I think you can give quite detailed questionnaires. You can offer you can have some closed questions, yes and no, were you satisfied, were you not, did this happen, time, maybe the promptness and time of your sale or delivery. And then you could get, would you like to tell us anything else today? And lots of customers use this as a response, and it's a good means of customer service too. Okay, what are some of the drawbacks? People who are very satisfied might tick the bare minimum. If you get good responses, like let's say for instance in the hotel industry, they'll often say, did any member of staff give you exceptionally good service today? And you think, well, I never took the name of anybody who served me. And so that might encourage you not to answer it in as much detail as possible. So there will be biased. Do we need there to be biased? Because it could be people who have bought. Will it matter that it's people who have bought when we really should be looking at people who will buy from us in the future? And it's less relevant where the target market doesn't use the internet. Young people nowadays think that everybody uses the internet. And actually, there's still a large percentage of the UK population that won't have access to the internet or choose not to use those methods in order to carry out their purchases. So it's unlikely they'll respond to surveys in that way. Finally then, to conclude our primary market research, we could test markets. So this is pretty much the same as our very first method, where we carried out experimentation, and this is linked specifically to our products then. So we're going to launch a product for a limited part of time, a limited time, and usually in a limited geographical area also. Will it provide a relative accurate predictor of future popularity? Yes, there's some there. Depends on what kind of product it is. It might not be a regional product. It could be moving from one country to another, and we could perhaps see there. Useful to gauge your popularity. The drawback, there is a me too in terms of a copy of product. So, especially if it's a competitive market, you'll get people who are just employed by businesses to go around and see what the competitors have got, and they'll write down any unique sort of ideas, and then think, oh, I'm just going to copy that too because that's far cheaper than coming up with the idea myself. And again, we've got the national launch. Okay, so now we're going to consider secondary market research. So remember what I said, it's particularly important for small businesses to use all of the secondary market research information that they can find, because that's cheaper and that's particularly important, and then fill the gaps with the primary market research. So what can we do? Secondary market research is to look at information that's been collected for a different purpose. It might be a little bit out of date, you don't know. Okay, so we could examine published documents then. So look at what's available. The additional name for that is called desk research. It does give you the opportunity to save a great deal of money, and that's particularly important, but it's not 100% reliable because it was collected for a different reason, and you may or not know the reason, and so therefore you've got to take it with there might be some discrepancies in here for that particular reason. Okay, so when we look at the sources then, if I say government publications, there is lots of, the Office of National Statistics have their own website now. There's lots of information that you can gain there. Another popular survey that's online is the census. So every 10 years, every household in the UK has to fill in the same survey. It represents what's going on in that household at one moment in time, and so that is particularly important, and it's a free government publication, so obviously it takes some time in order for the information to be collected and put online. But if you were could be 9 years ago, so before the information, so you've got to take it and you've got to consider what's happening to the population since then. Particular industries often find that they're talked about in newspapers, so the Times or the Guardian, some of the broadsheets, they'll have food articles, look at specific markets. Magazines, so we've got The Economist, Media Week, or The Grocer Today, particularly important for businesses that operate in that industry. We can look at company records, so if you're a public limited company, information has to be available online. That would be for competitors. Sorry, I'm going there. I suppose I'm going with both of these. Company records will also have, not for a new business, because you won't have anything for the past history, but everybody's required by law to keep their financial details. So you can look at, sales figures, and look for trends, things like that. Additionally, if your competitors are not companies, you won't be able to get any financial information from them, but you'll be able to get things like, what did they do in terms of their advertising? What have they got in terms of promotional materials? Do they have brochures? What's their website like? You could think about things like that. Remember that there are lots of different market research organisations that will sell you their information that they have collected in the past. If you look at loyalty cards, so you think about supermarkets or Superdrug, they all have loyalty cards now. They look at your past history. You'll get emails, or you might get targeted mail, and it'll be about products that you do or don't buy. And then, of course, we can look at the internet, so it's nice and easy, and that's particularly good because more and more companies are using that as a source of gathering data. We can look at social media sites, see what people's opinions are. Okay, so we've got some benefits. Secondary market research is already collected and collated. So you can make quick decisions available from it, particularly so if it's numerical information or if it's specific to your market. Sometimes you can get it for free. Look at some of the selections from up above. Others, it might be cheaper than primary market research. It's likely that there might be more regular collection, so it's easier to spot trends from secondary market research. Remember that secondary market research might include also any primary market research that we've done in the past. So companies might carry out the same kind of research over time to see if there's any trends. What are some of the drawbacks? So I've already spoke about the fact that the census, the national census, is every 10 years, so it will be out of date after a while. Will it give you a competitive advantage? I don't think so, because everybody can use it. It might allow you to spot a gap in the market, and then obviously it's up to you what you do as a result from it. But at least it gives you a level playing field from everybody else. You need to question the accuracy and the reliability of it. Remember, it will have been collected for a different purpose, and so it must not become your only source of research in order to move your business forward. When we're looking at discussing or assessing the value of it, here are some questions that you could perhaps use as a starting point upon which to build. So, another way that we can think about segmenting market research is to think about qualitative market research. So that's really trying to find out about people's opinions. So it's asking the questions why or how in order to find the information in order to target your customers or your product or whatever it is. So what are the benefits of asking why and how then? You get a greater insight. So if we know why people buy products, we could modify the product to increase their appeal to new or potential customers, and hopefully as a result from that we would get an increase in our overall sales. So it could highlight issues we weren't aware of, and by doing that we'd be able to take corrective action to overcome the problem or to seize the opportunity that might not have been considered before. And the final benefit, if you know what customers are thinking about when they're buying your product, you could modify your marketing strategies and methods in order to persuade your customers to buy more. What are the drawbacks then? It's very expensive and time consuming in order to do this, and qualitative research is normally conducted on a small scale, and because of that it generally leads to bias in your data, or it's unrepresentative opinions. You couldn't forecast that to be true for everybody. It's difficult to tabulate data, it's opinions. A lot of people say things in different ways. They'll be expressed in different ways. How on earth do you try and collate that so that it's usable? In opposition to qualitative market research then, we'll have quantitative research, and that's really how many, so it's numerical, who, male or female, how old, how often, things like that. So it's very useful in being able to summarise data. You can put it in a graph form, most people will be able to use it. It's concise and meaningful, so let's say for instance 8 out of 10 or 5% of the market share, something like that. Because it's numerical, it's often much easier to compare with other results of other organisations, competitors, or one division to the other, or one shop to the other, if you're lucky enough to be that large. And it's very useful to identify trends, and you can use mathematical techniques to project future trends. What are some of the drawbacks? It only shows what rather than why, and it might be the why that you actually need to understand in order to come up with the what. It lacks reliability if the sample is too small, or if it's biased in any way. So don't always carry out your sample at 5 o'clock on a Saturday night, because that market, the respondents could be very different from 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. The second half of this topic then is to put a bit more depth into our market research that we've carried out, and it's really about how we sample in the market in order to make the best use of our market research. So alternative key terms then, it's nice and easy. Our syllabus says that you only need to know random sampling and quota sampling, and so we'll look at the benefits and the drawbacks of each method of sampling the market in order to see what kind of answers we get. So what about random sampling then? So the easiest way to think about random sampling is to select names from a list of a computer database, and you might literally close your eyes and use your pen and draw dots over the page, and they're the people. It's purely by chance. You could stop the 10th person in the street, or you could. And it doesn't matter if they're male or female, if they're old or young. You could use the telephone directory. So it's already a list that's perhaps generated, and it is completely, you could walk down a street and knock on every door, and the people who are in there are the people who have been randomly sampled. There wasn't particularly method to it. I really quite like this because it's very cheap. It does assume all consumers are equally important, and I'm not quite sure about that. If you have a specific segment of the market, so it's maybe a women's product, and it's the age range, a given age range, then is random sampling the best way to get your target market's viewpoints? I'm not sure. We can have unexpected bias, particularly if, I know, you stood in a street corner and it was like Monday morning. You would get a particular type of respondent rather than just randomly the whole population. And it does require you access to a database, and that in itself might cost some money. So random sampling was very good if you don't have much money but you still wanted to do some sampling. Quota sampling is much more targeted then. So here's an example to start us off. If 20% of the target market are males aged 20 to 29, then 20% of the people answering your surveys should be males aged 20 to 29. So there's a bit more thought here, and actually the value of the answers that you get should be much more significant. However, what are some of the downsides? Once the quota has been reached, you can't have anybody else in that segment, even if they're the only people who are willing to answer your questions on that particular day. It takes more time, and it takes more care. You might be less successful in achieving each of the target segments. It may contain bias because it's not nearly as random. It's a need to fill that quota. And this is the most likely method to suffer from bias. So there are some overall benefits and drawbacks, no matter which method, if you use random sampling or if you use quota sampling. So you could draw a conclusion that says whole groups can indicate the whole market. So if you just chose 10 people and you multiplied that by X amounts, that would be the behaviour of the X amounts. There's flexibility in there. It's much more likely that you can adapt the gathering of the data as things go on. I think there is some reliability in the information that's collected. it depends what sample size you can gather, and there's opportunities to learn about the market quickly. So it's much less onerous than if you had a wide range of opinions, and it allows you to act quickly. You can respond and gain a competitive advantage. What are some of the drawbacks then? You might target the wrong kind of person, so it might be unrepresentative. Remember, that's particularly true if you have a very small segment of the market that you're targeting. Will there be bias in the questions? Do you get answers? Are they really truthful? Do we just give the answer that we think that is necessary? Is it an accurate profile? I suppose it depends. Have you actually got a profile of your consumer or the potential consumer of your particular product? And a last drawback, you've got to consider if the markets or the tastes are constantly changing. So some markets are called very fast-paced, and it means by the time you actually got the opinions, it's unlikely that they would be of any benefit. So the music industry or technology markets, all of those are very fast-moving. So you could ask yourself then, what factors might influence the choice of sampling method? So whether I use random sampling or quota sampling. So a business might look at the cost and availability of the finance. Random sampling is far cheaper because it doesn't involve the very careful planning before the survey is conducted. Quota sampling could also be very cheap if the target market is known. So you've got to ask those two questions. You've got to think about the time involved. Random sampling can be conducted much more speedily. How important is the market segment? If the buying behaviour differs between two different types of consumers, maybe quota sampling will need to be engaged in order to get much more accurate results. So that will also be whether the business is targeting a specific group of customers. It's likely that quota sampling will be used if that is true, rather than random sampling. And what do you understand about your customer base? So if you're unaware of the type of customer that it attracts or will attract in the future, quota sampling won't be used. We can use random sampling. But if you actually know about the type of customer that will be likely to be interested in your product, then it's far easier to use quota sampling. And finally then, even if you don't think there's an apparent link between two factors, it doesn't mean to say there's a causal link. So you should recognise that there are lots of other factors that could influence the results that you get or the predictions that are made, the trends that are drawn.